Hey everyone, I'm rather Incoherent, and this is Joe Diamond. He's the first Seeker on the tier list, and the fact that I even have any Seeker, even Joe, in my D tier might be cynicism. Or more than that, it might be personal distaste for Joe, because I've spent so much time working on Joe and I cannot get it to work. So I'm going to talk about Joe in theory a lot. I could show you like 7 or 8 different Joe decks we have played at our table, but I don't see the purpose in doing it, because I can show you 7 or 8 bad decks for anyone. It's easy to cook up a bad deck. The thing that's interesting about Joe that makes me want to show you the decks we played is that I can't seem to cook up, no one at my table seems to be able to cook up a really good Joe deck. Because he's such a difficult deck building puzzle, and he's always promising that if you can just figure it out, just find a few more support cards, a few more combos, a few more something, he's just a few pieces away from everything clicking into place and going straight to the moon, at least making it into A tier, probably higher. So let's talk about the private investigator, the unsolvable puzzle, Joe Diamond. Really, the majority of this video could be spent talking just about this stat line. He's got 2 in his Mythos resilient stats of head and foot, and 4 in his proactive stats of book and fist. He has the card pool you'd expect for that exact stat line, which is Seeker 5, Guardian 2, which is kind of the card pool you need to be tempted to make this puzzle work. And then his ability is all about the hunch deck, and his deck requirements are about making the hunch deck. And the hunch deck is fine. Your signature weakness in it is incredibly soft, not a big deal. And then on top of the hunch deck, you have just like a little bit of random throughput from the value you get from the hunch deck, the extra card that's almost in your hand, the 2 resource discount on some of the cards. Like the hunch deck is good throughput value, but it's not enough to be a game warping thing. It feels like it should be this tremendous, super integral part of Joe, and it's not. It's just like kind of nice. It's just there. Joe is about the stat line and the card pool and making a hunch deck that's as easy to get value out of as possible, but the hunch deck is really a pretty subpar ability and not super important. So when you're building Joe Diamond, the puzzle you set out to solve is that you have 3 things your stat line needs of you. First, you could just give up on Fist or Book, and that would result in a character that's much easier to optimize. Kluber Joe and Fighter Joe are not nearly as hard to build as Flex Joe. And the reason for this is because you have time to do 2 of the 3 things. Fix your Mythos phase, make your Book really valuable proactively, or make your Fist really valuable proactively. If you try to do all 3, it's a very setup heavy deck, and you lose a lot of slots in your deck committing to both roles simultaneously, which results in you, how to put it? Those same assets that are taking time to set up are cutting into the events that would have helped your previous role. So you're losing some of your best skills and your best events for clue finding when you have to cut something to make room for a fighting asset. That's the issue. When you try to do all 3, you find that you're barely able to do all of them at once, and you've made a lot of concessions that's very awkward. A typical Joe deck that we've seen at our table either does solve all 3 but takes too long setting up and never feels that powerful proactively, or it gives up something. I've seen Flex Joes that just died to the Mythos phase, and that was not the right call. It wasn't worth it. They just got destroyed by Bison Villainy and every other head test for the entirety of Circle Undone. It was the most brutal thing I've ever watched. I hear people talk to me in the comments about like how they made Joe Diamonds that ignored the Mythos phase and it was fine. And I was like, that's nice. Maybe you can make a character that ignored the economy and your friends could just give you Faustian bargains. But that's just getting very lucky. You have to deal with the Mythos phase in every character, and especially in Joe. And that's not something you can choose to give up. You have to spend some time solving your Mythos phase, which leaves you with just enough time to either be really good at finding clues or pretty good at fighting. And you can't really do both. And the puzzle for Joe isn't like the best Kluber Joe or the best Fighter Joe. Those decks are just fine. If we'd ever just given up on chasing the dream and sat down and played a really optimized Mythos resilient Kluber Joe, that dude would be somewhere in low B tier. He doesn't deserve to be in C tier. Or sorry, that dude would be, I'm still getting used to the new tiers on my tier list. That optimized Kluber Joe would be somewhere in low C tier, and he doesn't deserve to be in a D tier, because all the tiers have basically gone down a rank since I removed A+ and added F. But we never play that version of Joe. We always chase the dream. And when I sat down to make this video trying to figure out what deck to show you, I had so many different decks I could pick from, more than any other character. And I don't want to show you any of the decks we played, because it's not helpful. The problem's already easily articulated. It's the Mythos stats, it's the time to set up. So I'm going to show you the deck that has caused problems. The deck that is probably going to be mentioned in a future video when I talk about where Joe actually gets ranked. Welcome to a Flex Joe deck inspired by Val on Arkham DB. If you don't know Val, you haven't looked at very many decks. They are like the most prolific deck poster on the entire website. and I often have issues with their decks, either viewing them as optimistic or fun, and not being like super optimized. Being about living a dream or about living a thematic identity and not necessarily about playing the best game. However, their concept for Joe is to do something that typically I think isn't the best thing a Seeker can do, which is use Dream Enhancing Serum and spend some setup turns to put your whole hand, or your whole deck rather, into your hand. And the benefit of this for Joe is it allows a minimum number of card slots to beat his Mythos phase, allows you to use just like 1-of copies of Forewarned and Logical Reason to beat like anything the Mythos phase could ever do to you, and then it allows you to use these Colt 1911s as a real viable weapon by keeping them loaded with 1 in the chamber. And I've made a lot of adjustments from the deck they originally had, but I think there's a real powerful flex deck somewhere in that concept. I still need to like playtest this, and I'm gonna talk more about that in a second, because you have to do like some amount of math. You have to make sure that your assets in play with your Dream Enhancing Serum is there are 20 cards left going into your deck, and Joe's Hunch deck makes that a little bit of a less obvious number than it normally would be. So I'm not entirely sure that this quite works as it currently is, but this is the concept for a Joe deck that could be really good. You just have to set up for a little while, get your entire deck into your hand, then you're safe to the Mythos. You've got really powerful proactive plays because you should be drawing what's left of your deck every turn, which will include multiple copies of Deduction every time. You're guaranteed to have bullets and a gun that's firing at base 7 because of custom mods, 10 if it's the one in the chamber shot. It just seems like a really solid concept. The question's just, how reliably does it set up? And you might be like, oh, 36 experience, what's the deck core? It's Cryptic Research. This is the only card you need. Forewarned is kind of nice, but like even then, this is a 9 experience deck core. If you ask me, I don't think there's much you actually need here. And this is the epitome of the Joe problem. This deck's like, trust me, man, draw your whole deck, use Dream Enhancing Serum, straight to the moon, top of A tier at least. Look how much experience I cost, that's right, nothing. The deck's really tempting. We keep finding Joe decks like this. I didn't sit down today, I can't even talk. I didn't sit down today to talk about Flex Joe that holds his entire deck in his hand every turn. This is something I found out doing Joe research, trying to make as informed and competent as a Joe video as I could. And when I found this, I was like, guys, we need to play a standalone. You wanna do like City of the Elder things and Edge of the Earth as a standalone with like 39 experience deck threshold? That might be too high, I don't know. Like, can we figure something out? And when I explained what we were doing, the idea quickly came up. What if we did the standalone with 3 Joe decks and we had a Kluber and a Fighter Joe deck that were also both really optimized? And like we got all the Joe out of our system. So it turns out that like, even though I'm posting to explain why Joe is in my D tier, I honestly don't even think Joe deserves to be here right now. I think he gets to be bottom of 5. And then depending on like how these decks do, I could see like Fight Joe staying right here. I could see Clue Joe getting to like Vincent Lee. And Flex Joe, like the ceiling for Flex Joe's like, where's Finn? Where's Parallel Skids? The ceiling for Flex Joe's like all the way up here, right? So even though this is covering Joe Diamond, I'm moving him out of my D tier. I'm putting him at the bottom of C because I genuinely can't fathom Joe being worse than that. When I started this series, I originally said that I would be covering my F tier, D tier, and I'd probably be going into my hot takes on C tier, and I'm definitely doing that. I'll be talking about Leo Anderson, who's been moving up and down during this series. I'll be talking about Sister Mary. And then depending on the reaction at that point, I'll see if I want to keep going up the tier list. I imagine people have positive reactions to this, because even though I don't feel like the most enthused about talking theoretically and not having a specific list, I think other people don't mind that as much as I do. I always have this false is the wrong word. I always have this like unnecessary frivolous need to be more of an authority than I am when I'm talking about something, and when I feel like I don't know exactly what's going on, I feel like I shouldn't be talking at all sometimes. Which is just part of the way that my head works, and as a result, it's why I haven't posted videos for characters that I haven't like played through and really gotten into in the same way. And while I played the absolute shit out of Joe, I have not played the absolute shit out of characters like Rita and Lola, which have been in this series. It's been what I've been talking about. It's like the change in video production I've been doing. And the reason I'm rambling about video production is because there's not a lot more for me to say about Joe. Joe is a character where his floor is pretty low because the default state of being for a Joe is dead, right? That's what happens to a Joe if you don't do anything special. Joe dies. And then as you try to solve the puzzle, I think there are a lot of genuine D tier results. We've seen more D tier Joes than anything. But because my tier list is for optimized characters, I think Optimal Joe is going to fall at the floor of C tier. And I think if this deck lives up to its hype, or Goon Joe, or Clue Joe, he'll probably move up some amount. But I just have to, like, I don't want to put off talking about Joe because I think this part of my opinion about Joe, this being stuck in a testing nightmare where we just keep playing Joe and we keep playing Joe and it never works, and we're just getting progressively cooler ideas for how to make Joe not garbage. I think that's the most earnest and honest representation of our experience with Joe possible. That I start a video with the intent to say, hey, Joe's trash, you can't solve the puzzle, and I end the video with like, hey, we've got 3 new Joe decks, we're testing all of them, Joe's going straight to the moon. Because that's the fucking Joe Diamond experience. It feels like a puzzle worth solving. You sort out these Mythos stats, you've got insane proactive stats then, if you can just figure out how to do it with minimal pieces. And this is the minimal piece solution to his Mythos. You use Dream Enhancing Serum High Draw deck to keep all your cards in your hand, which is generally valuable because it helps with looping deductions, and that also ensures you have Eurekas and Take the Initiatives to just pass the Mythos test. You have additionally a copy of Forewarned and a copy of Logical Reasoning if you auto-fail. You've got big hand stuff going on with Lab Assistant, strong flex stuff because you can have Magnifying Glasses and your signatures out at the same time. Like, I've explained the deck, I don't need to explain it again. But this is the Joe experience. The only thing more authentic to talking about Joe than doing this, having the Joe deck and talking about testing more Joe decks, is going into a campaign and just getting shit on the whole campaign and feeling like you're just barely carrying your weight. Which is that's predominantly our experience with Joe, is feeling like Joe is underperforming and something's gone wrong. Coming back to the tier list, I've got him above characters like Roland and Marie, who I've definitely played in campaigns where they were consistently more valuable than Joe was. But at the same time, I feel like we just can't play Joe right. I don't know if having him here is hype or cynicism. He's exasperating. Making a video talking about where Joe should be, like, I don't even remember the Kohaku deck I played alongside, and I feel more confident talking about Kohaku than I do talking about Joe. Spoilers, I won't be covering Kohaku at all until he gets played again. I think Joe definitely deserves to be in C tier. I think just having practice makes perfect and deduction in enough ways to survive the Mythos phase that he shouldn't be dying is enough to make him meaningfully above the people in D tier. And I am certain that there is a way to build Joe that is better than what we've been doing that earns him his spot here. However, when I put him here, it enters the tier list problem that I dislike, that all 3 of these tiers, I think it's a dozen each. Yeah, 36 characters are in these 3 tiers, and only, what is this, like 11? 13 are down here in the bottom 2? It feels inaccurate. It feels like, should I have a hard cutoff at Silas and bring Rita and Marie down to my F tier? Just like drag stuff down? Because I'm obviously, if this is relative to other investigators, it's real weird that such a small percentage of the characters are bad, right? So like when I move Joe up, it's not like incentive for me to, it's not making me think, yeah, I'm being too mean to Joe. It's making me think I'm not being mean enough to the people around Joe, and I'm being too nice. This feels campaign relative to have this many people this highly ranked, and we need to drag them down. I tried to move it around, but man, is it hard to move Dexter Drake out of very strong or Monterey Jack out of strong. The order to the characters is something I'm broadly confident in, but every time I look at this huge block between A, B, and C, I feel like if it's investigator relative, the bottom tier should be bigger, but then I have to define what they mean other than just the bottom 6 of the character pool. It's like, if it's just percentile based, then every tier gets 10 people and the tier doesn't mean anything. It's just the next 10 characters. I think it's very appropriate to talking about Joe that I've found myself discussing something wholly unrelated to Joe and abstract, because that's sort of how it is building a Joe deck. You start off with a simple idea, you're gonna run more skills, and you're gonna use like Take the Initiative and Eureka and the Grizzly Totem, and you're gonna beat the Mythos deck that way. And then like before you know it, you're talking about Bestow Resolve and running all the neutral skills, and it's just a shit show. Every time I talk about Joe, I end up with like 2 or 3 decks that are halfway built and 1 crazy deck like the one I've just shown you. I'm hoping that I can make a video talking about a variety of good Joe decks in the near future. Not even great Joe decks, just good Joe decks. And that he confidently deserves to be above my D tier, at least with the current definitions of what the D tier is. But right now, all I can say about Joe is that he's one of the hardest characters to build correctly and to truly optimize. Every other character, not every, almost every other character feels easier to build for me. Anyways, as I've already started to ramble off a couple of times, I'm gonna call it here. I've been rather incoherent. That statement's exceptionally true this time. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed hearing me talk about Joe and why he's so hard to build and my hype for testing him more and my hate for how many times I've tested him and only failed so far, then please do like, comment, and subscribe. I do really appreciate it. And I also tremendously appreciate the people supporting me over on Patreon and the members on YouTube. Thank you for your time, and see you in the next one.